right, revolutionary greetings. My name is Vic from ANTICONQUISTA, and I'm joined today by Karina from ANTICONQUISTA and Saheli from Orinoco Tribune. Ladies, how we doing?
Good, doing good. Thanks for having us.
Fine, Victor, and thanks a lot. And of course, I'm glad that you are restarting this thing.
Absolutely, absolutely. So this is Nuestra America. I think it's episode 22. I think that's what it is. Check us out on all social media platforms. We're at anticonquista.com. We're on Twitter. We're on Facebook. We're on Instagram. And we are streaming live on Facebook and YouTube at the moment. Please like, please share, please subscribe. That'll really help us out in getting the word out there in terms of the work that we do. All right, so ladies, we have a lot to talk about. Donald Trump took office on January 20th. He's now President Donald Trump, right? And a lot has happened since January 20th. I'm gonna just throw this out there. Like, what do you ladies want to start with? Because there's so much, and I know we have to unpack a lot of stuff, and we could probably do like a 5-hour program tonight, but we're gonna try to keep it, under an hour if we could, maybe an hour and a half or so. But where do you ladies want to start?
Go ahead, Hermana.
Oh, actually, whatever you wish. I mean, there is, like you said, there is so much to talk, and it is just a beginning. So maybe we can start with whatever you wish. You have something?
So let's do this. Why don't I'm gonna start with
I can
Clip.
start.
You want to start?
Yeah, I can start.
All right, go ahead, Karina.
So thanks. So overall, I think kind of what I envision Trump's role is to be right now is kind of his job is to oversee kind of like the repackaging of U.S. empire. Like it's going to be the downsizing of U.S. empire, but he has to sell it in such a way because the American public audience is very politically immature. And so he has to sell it in a certain way where it looks like repackaging America, like he's rebuilding America. And so essentially, I mean, the great American hoax is over. The United States is going to withdraw globally and become less competitive globally. And it would have happened anyway. One thing that I think it's important to mention when we're talking about the Trump presidency is to move away from this idea of what if Kamala Harris, because the same thing would have happened under Kamala Harris anyway. So there was no alternative that we missed by, electing Kamala Harris. And essentially, to me, it looks like a question of how do you want your fascism delivered to you? Do you want it with a polished Ivy League, sophisticated, person like Barack Obama, or do you want a crude, vulgar version of fascism, which is what you see with President Trump? So I think that while we see the United States' ability to terrorize global South nations decline, what we're going to see inside empire is that the violence is going to be turning inward on us, So increased violence internally is going to be a logical outcome. For example, there's an analogy that if you're raising a wolf, you raise the wolf on human meat, for example, and that's what you feed it. So eventually the wolf is going to lose the ability to decipher you from the meat that you've been feeding it, and that's to say that the United States has been feeding on the flesh of the global South for decades, if not centuries. And so now that is going to be turned in onto the inside of empire. So now the empire is turning all this violence inward. And interestingly, I think that is one of the reasons why information control is getting worse and worse. For example, when you think of an interrogation room, well, what happens when the camera goes off on the interrogation room? That means the tactics of control and manipulation are going to get a lot worse, right? That means that, with the example of cop cities, the plan is to tighten repression on the people because the contradictions of the declining empire are going to be pushed closer and closer to the forefront. So to reconcile this, with the decline and destabilization of American society, the plan is to tighten the grip on the people internally. And historically, oppressed and colonized people, racialized people, have always been made the scapegoat for the insecurities and failures of the USA. And so, this is another thing that we had talked about when planning is the idea of the Second Amendment. How does that look for colonized and racialized people that are under foreign occupation in the United States? Like, that's going to be, as the violence gets worse and worse, this also leads to this idea of the pseudo-nativist agenda. And this has been classically one of the tactics of settler colonialism, which is to invert real history, and so the settlers become the real natives. So that links to this idea of, the United States as, this big, strong power. It's the hyper masculinity, it's the hyper violence, and the decline of empire. It's like that, what they call when that crocodile does the death spin. Its actions become more and more irrational. It's just, and that's the irrational de-escalation or disintegration of American society that I think we're seeing.
Yeah, definitely. And when you say it, actually, it's very interesting that you said this word, the violence turning inwards, because that is exactly what happened with fascism as we knew it in the last century. That when in these days there is from the West a sort of a narrative imposition on the rest of the world that fascism was something unique, that it was something uniquely inhuman, uniquely violent, exceptional, etc. Whereas we have always, who were colonized, we were always recognized that fascism was just the same settler colonialism and ethnic cleansing turned inwards into Europe. So fascism was nothing new. I mean, in the rest of the world, they had been doing that. By the time fascism, within quotes, came in Europe with the Nazi Germany and its allies, until that we had suffered the same things for 400 years or more than that. And by the time it came in Europe, they considered it said something new, but it wasn't. They had been doing the same thing to others, and that thing was just turned inwards. So it could be that the US could suffer in the same way. But my question is, are we ready for for taking this fascism head on, like for combating it? What do you think?
Well, I think that the ones who are going to come out of this, who are going to survive, are the ones that are able to recognize and identify that all of the structures of American hegemonic power are crumbling. All the post-World War II, economic bullying that the United States did all over the world, all those structures are crumbling. And so I think those who are going to survive are the ones who are going to be able to make new alliances, new strategic relations of power. And so that leads to the idea, one of the ideas that ANTICONQUISTA, of course, promotes is that, that's why we want to focus on fertilizing the front lines, those on the front lines of fighting imperialism, because South to South alliances are going to be what replaces the decline of the United States into merely a regional power.
Yeah, many of our leaders do not recognize this, and that is exactly what Victor now has on on the screen. And this is something that is very interesting, that this has always seemed interesting to me about picking US or picking China, when the two are actually completely different, in the sense that, and that's also very interesting. I'll come to it. What I mean is that when in the South, I mean, if you only focus in Latin America, and we'll see that a lot of the countries that were or still are, I mean, whose leaders at least still are, would like to be subjugated to the US and subjugate their population to the US because of their own benefits, they also have economic ties with China, because that is the only tie that really benefits them. I mean, including benefits them as personally. If you think of countries like Peru or El Salvador, which are US vassal states, even they have connections with China. Peru is part of China's Belt and Road Initiative, and China is building infrastructure projects there because the US does not build infrastructure. What it only builds are military bases, nothing else. The population be damned. So they know that if they do not have infrastructure, they someday, the population would be so poor and they would have nothing to lose that they would turn against their rulers. So they would also wish to have the infrastructure project so that they can, at least people can at least have crumbs and live off it. So yet you will see that the moment that the US goes into those countries, like thinks that it's becoming too close to China, even if not strategically, even if not geopolitically, they'll think that because the empire recognizes it, right? That economic power is a huge power because it also has it, it also wills it. So when it sees that in these countries are probably becoming close to China, they just go into those countries and threaten their leaders with military force, with something else, not openly, because what happens behind closed doors we don't know, but openly these countries would somehow try to distance themselves from China. For example, recently what happened in Panama with the canal and the establishment, the entire US establishment, everyone is sort of promoting that it is China that controls the canal, and that even there is that apparently there is a threat that the Chinese military could send its naval forces through the canal to attack the US. And China is not planning anything like that, but there is the idea. And Marco Rubio went to Panama, threatened its president, and then he says two things. One is that what will happen with the canal will be decided by the canal authorities because it has a sort of autonomy. And secondly, that there are two companies based in Hong Kong that manage the ports at the two ends of the canal. And he said that it will be audited, as if during all those years it was not. I don't know if it was, but if it was not audited all these years, then it is a failure of the Panamanian establishment, state, audit authorities, government, etc., and it does not reflect on China. So, and secondly, the Hong Kong-based companies, they just manage the ports. They do not own the canal, nothing. Yet, what did the president say? That it will be audited, and that it also had signed the Belt and Road Initiative Agreement in 2017. So when it comes up for renewal 2 years later, it will not be renewed. He said these things, and so it will. I mean, this is sort of frustrating to see over and over again that Latin American leaders, presidents, heads of state, whenever they're threatened with force by the US, most of them, sort of retreat, and they really don't really think about their people. They think about saving their own positions, their power, and of remaining close to the US, because although it does not function, although when they will not be necessary for the empire, they will be discarded. Again, the example of Panama is very important in this thing. So,
and the Ukraine now is when it's no longer helpful, they will be replaced by someone else. But was that Marco Rubio that you had on the screen, Victor?
Before I did, yeah.
Yeah, so he also had a conversation with Bukele in El Salvador, right? Do we want to talk about that?
Yeah, you sure go. I mean, if you wish to say something about it, sure, then I'll talk.
Well, I believe that Bukele
offered. Go ahead, yeah.
I believe that Bukele offered to support a population of incarcerated in El Salvador, and it's interesting that Marco Rubio was selected to go speak to him. Of course, we know Marco Rubio was instrumental in the removal of Evo Morales in Bolivia. There were, I believe, 3 U.S. government officials who were pinpointed as having assisted with that coup. And but one of the things that Marco Rubio addressed, I don't know if we're going to watch this later, but where he's talking about he's kind of doing a soft backpedal, or he's representing United States, pulling back as kind of in a magnanimous way, being like, oh, we've policed, not policed, we've helped the world, the whole world for so many decades. We've had to be, the governors of the planet, and we simply cannot afford to be that magnanimous anymore to the rest of the world. So, that's why Trump is, talking about Canada and Greenland. That's this kind of kind of a retreat by trying to be as aggressive as possible. They're trying to reframe and set up the United States to be merely a regional power, and I guess we're going to be talking about that too.
Yeah,
Okay.
let me read a quote by Marco Rubio,
Yeah, sure.
the United States Secretary of State. It's not normal for the world to simply have a unipolar power. That was an anomaly. That was a product of the end of the Cold War. But eventually, you're going to return back to having a multipolar world. We face that now with China and to some extent Russia. And so this was a pretty interesting admission, and I think it's being misinterpreted by some folks who claim to be leftists as something else. But I'll let you folks continue to chime in on this.
Well, I think that's true, Victor. I think some people are saying, wow, look at these great things that, Trump is talking about, withdrawing, decreasing military spending, that kind of thing. And it's, I don't know if you guys have ever seen the cowboy movies where the cowboy who's losing, when he's losing and he just has to run away, he starts shooting wildly, like in all these directions. And he's just like retreating, but he's shooting wildly,
Right.
And so I think that's what the U.S. is trying to do now. It's retreating, but the only thing it knows is aggression. So it's trying to retreat and still have these, exert aggression or threats in any ways where it still may have little influence now. And so, but that also leads to the kind of the identity crisis that a lot of Americans are having now, because, you think of a lot of Americans are still drunk on the narcotic of white supremacist indoctrination. They still believe that United States is the global power and they can't fathom anything else. Well, the fact is that the United States never earned status as a global power. It hijacked, the British Empire when it was crumbling, and it just came into that space and took over. And it didn't take over because it was great, because it was earned power. It learned, how to be predatory and exert economic terrorism on countries who, were crushed after the Second World War. And then it started, that's how we got 800 military bases all over the world, is because, it was always by force and coercion. And so ironically, now all those countries who have been under, punishment of sanctions, all those countries, now is the time to push back. Now is the time for the global South to push back and make those strategic alliances South to South, and make, this, kind of American supremacy obsolete. And so I think that it's a great opportunity. Certainly things are going to get very chaotic, especially within the imperial core, but it's a great opportunity for the rest of the world.
I think it will get chaotic everywhere, because, for, like you mentioned, that after the Second World War it emerged, although we talked of Cold War and bipolar world, etc., it was still sort of unipolar, because the United States had control over the multilateral economic institutions or financial institutions all over the world. I'm talking about the International Monetary Fund, about the World Bank, but it also has control in the United Nations, which is supposed to be the most multilateral and equal for everyone, but it still has a veto power in the Security Council, and it uses it to save itself and not to, it does not use the veto for good. It never ever used it for good. So of course it should not. No country should have that sort of power, but as long as the US has, we would also want to have some on our side to have it as deterrent, if not anything else. Still, I would say that the United States was always, like, during all this time, starting from 1945 onwards, it had a sort of a unipolar control in the world, especially through the financial institutions. Now, with sanctions, it has, like, sort of sanctioned itself, in a sense that that people have understood that it can, this sort of imbalance of power can no longer go on, and that's why the world started getting fragmented into blocks. And now we again see, although there is talk of multipolarity, we again see it's sort of becoming bipolar, becoming too large, too broad blocks. So and when I also say one thing, that I will believe I will believe it when I see it. That is, I will believe the United States is reducing its military spending when I see it, because until and unless it is not just dependent on the military budget, because it can reduce its military budget by, I don't know, 200 million or something, and yet it will still remain the largest military spender in the world, and the larger spender than the next 10 countries combined. So Trump is sort of conditioning his the reduction of military budget with China and Russia also reducing their military spending by half, as if they do not, then the US would not. The question is how, because the two countries that he is naming, which immediately follows the US in the military spending, they are actually, if you look at the numbers, they are far behind. So first of all, why should they reduce their military spending? Because the US wants them to, because they are separate countries, they are sovereign, they should decide what they would do. Secondly, does any of those two countries have 900 military bases all over the world? No. So in order, if the US wants to maintain all these bases, it wants to maintain its hegemonic control over the world, then it would have to do it militarily, because it cannot do it economically. I don't think that Trump is going to significantly reduce the military budget. That's one. Secondly, in the countries where the US invaded and then after many years it retreated, it did not really pull out. I mean, it pulled out its military, but what it did not pull out are its contractors. So if you go to Afghanistan, if you go to Iraq, if you go elsewhere, I mean, if although Europe is really militarily occupied by the US, they may not recognize it, but we do. But if in these two countries that I mentioned, you have US military contractors there. So the military, as in the US troops, they have gone home, and there are some in Iraq still, but the contractors, and they control everything. I mean, they are there, especially in the resource rich areas. They control the oil bases, they control the mines, other mines, they control the heavy industries. I don't know if you know this, but all the oil income of Iraq, all the oil that it sells, its oil revenue is deposited in the US Federal Reserve in New York. So a country does not even have control over its own resources, own foreign revenue. So that you can imagine what sort of sovereignty that country has. So it is still controlled by the US, whether militarily, yes, militarily because of the contractors, and economically. For example, in case of Yemen, the part that the Ansar Allah does not control, in that part there are US military contractors, and you have these companies. You have Total Energies, which is French. You have ConocoPhillips, which is based in the US. You have ExxonMobil. They are extracting oil from the offshore oil blocks, including from around the Socotra Island region, which is a biodiversity hotspot. So the US military is in all these regions, in like disguised. So I don't think the US is going to reduce its military spending significantly, even if Trump says it, and even if it looks like from 1 trillion it is 800 billion, it will still be huge. It will still be impossible to imagine.
Yeah. So I'm sorry, Karina. It's just you.
No.
So so a couple things. There've been a lot of headlines. With regards to this issue of like Trump being characterized. Let me back up a little bit. I heard Scott Ritter on a program, and what we think of Scott Ritter, Karina. I heard him on a program say that Trump is some revolutionary. He's a revolutionary president. I think on Jimmy Dore's program, Steve Bannon called them today's Abraham Lincoln, whatever that means. So he's being, projected as this some sort of like real hero, like American hero, that's here to save the republic and everything like that. And then some so-called leftists, folks like the ACP are touting a lot of the stuff. So let's go over some of these headlines. So the USAID has been in the headlines. Now we've railed against the USAID forever, and so I don't feel terrible at all for anyone who's for the liberals who are crying over this stuff, because they're the ones who seem most upset. It looks like they had a real stronghold on this institution. Russia's been in the news a lot because, again, and it looked like Zelensky was upset that he spoke to Putin before he spoke to Zelensky, and it looks like there's Trump may try to work out a deal there to sort of quote unquote end this war between the Russians and the Ukrainians. Again, you had Marco Rubio, State Secretary, talk about we are now in a multipolar world. And then just within the last couple of days, Trump talking about slashing the defense budget in half. So all of this stuff by so-called folks on the left is being touted as you see, we're right, and now we got these Maga communists or whatever the hell they're called. And they're saying, look, this is a real movement. This is why you need to support. And they're to me, they're missing the point. And their analysis just is terrible. When you hear, and matter of fact, I'm gonna take the opportunity now, if you ladies don't mind, and for the audience, bear with me. I promise you, it's worth it. I'm gonna play Steve Bannon. He was on Jimmy Dore's program, and by the way, Jimmy Dore's a racist. I just want to say that, whether he consciously knows that he's a racist or it's a subconscious thing, he's a racist, and he's pushing a lot of pseudoscience out there. And this is another one of my pet peeves with Jimmy Dore. We talked about it off air. Please don't listen to him from any medical advice. That he's causing a lot of damage. Go talk to your doctor, talk to your medical professional. Do not listen to Jimmy Dore and the idiots that he has, these fringe quote unquote doctors and medical professionals on his program who are pushing pseudoscience. Anyways, that being said, I'm going to play Steve Bannon on Jimmy Dore's program. And this is so important. I'm gonna play the whole, not a clip that goes from about the 15-minute mark to the 23-minute mark. It's just really, really, really important for folks to listen, really pay attention and listen to what he's saying, because Steve Bannon was a chief strategist of Trump the first time he was president. It looks like he has his he's really tapped into Washington D.C. and the Oval Office. He's telling you exactly what this Trump administration is trying to do. And this is extreme. If you're Latino, if you're Latin American, if you care about Latin America, if you care about your people, you have to pay attention to this little clip here. So bear with me here. I'm gonna just play this clip. Let me just pull it up. Let's see here. That's not it. And here we go.
Well, first off, I think they're going to, the Doge guys are going after, they have a big mandate, a writ to go after all this. And we'll talk about in a second how it ties back to reality of the budgeting process. The consumer, which I think, look, the payday lending, there were some horrible abuses. I think there's arguments on both sides. One, does actually restrict credit to people and what it's actually done to protect people. I do think there's arguments to keep parts of it. There's arguments to take down parts of it. They're going to go through and do an audit. All that eventually is going to have to come back through Congress. I think you're seeing this. They put a budget out today. That's a 10-year budget. It's a joke on the math, but it doesn't have any Doge elements in it. I mean, all this thing Doge is doing and saying they're going to get $1 trillion in cuts a year, which we need. I don't happen to think it's that much waste, fraud, and abuse. There is some. I think they've already found some. And there may be more incompetence than we even know. We need to get to the bottom of that and root it out. I do think that the only way you're going to get these budget deficits under control, and if you don't get them under control, you're not going to get inflation under control, is that you have to do major programmatic cuts. And I think those programmatic cuts have to start the Defense Department. You have to cross the Potomac and get into the Defense Department. Until you go to the Defense Department, and let's leave waste, fraud, and abuse aside and the fact they haven't been able to get an audit done in decades. I'm just talking programmatically, and particularly how it lines up with President Trump's kind of rethinking of our strategy, which is now a hemispheric strategy. He's kind of laying out that, and Rubio talked about this, the end of the post-war rules-based international order means that you don't need the United States from NATO to the Middle East to the Malacca Straits and South China Sea and then up to Korea and Japan. The United States doesn't need to be everywhere. We take care of this hemisphere from the Panama Canal to Greenland and kind of block the Russian Navy up there, which it will, and cut off the Chinese Navy to get into the Gulf of America from the Pacific. You have a kind of a Monroe Doctrine 2.0. You had Bolsonaro in Brazil, Milei in Argentina. You've secured the hemisphere. You add Canada, or even if you don't, you have some sort of partnership with Alaska. You got Alaska, Greenland, and you got Canada. You're at the Arctic, which is going to be the new great game of the 21st century between China, Russia, and the United States. My point is, you have a total hemispheric. You're totally hemispherically secured. You take the island chains in the Pacific, and you've secured the United States of America from any real attacks. You put an Iron Dome on it, anti-ballistic missile, I'm good to go. Then we're hermetically sealed, essentially, against the rest of the world. Not perfectly, but a lot more than we are today, which is about 2%. So you do that. Your priorities can change in defense. We can't spend right now. It's $900 billion. The NDA for defense, NDAA, and I will tell people it's really $1 trillion because they hide other costs everywhere. And the budget they put out today, they got 100. There's a thing out with $170 billion additional for DHS, I think it is, for the invasion of the southern border, to seal the border, but to do the mass deportation. $175 billion. Think of that ticket. There's another $100 billion in defense added on to the $900 billion we're spending. We just can't do it. We're at 3.4, 3.5% of GDP on our defense spending, and it just can't continue. And I come at this from a guy that I was 7.5, 8 years as a naval officer, 3.5, 4 years at sea on a combatant on a destroyer back at the Pentagon. My daughter's a West Point grad. She served with the 101st Airborne in Iraq. So we're not doves. I'm kind of a hawk, but I consider myself rational in about how you go about this. And if we're serious about cutting this budget, we have to cross the Pentagon, or have to cross the Potomac and start at the Pentagon.
And so that's what Panama and the Greenland was all about. So Panama was about getting Chinese out of the Panama Canal, and Greenland was about securing it from Russia.
So if you take it's like Alfred Lord Mahan, the great theoretician that the British based their naval strategy on. It's if you take the Panama Canal and you block the ability of the Chinese and the Russian Navy ever to team up, and you go all the way up the East Coast of the thing, and you go Greenland can block the Russian Navy, particularly the submarines, the fast attack and the ballistic missile submarines from coming out of Murmansk and Archangel in the Arctic and coming down past Greenland and between Greenland and Iceland, right there in that slot. With the United States, you build a base right there. You put hunter-killer aircraft. You put fast attack submarines. You bottle them up. Right now, we have sonar buoys and sophisticated. There's also classified, but non-classified. The sonar buoys, you can track them and trail them. Here, you can bottle them up. You bottle up the Russian Navy, and you've secured the United States. You put an Iron Dome on it, and that's kind of expensive, and technologically we can't get there. But you've got the Monroe Doctrine 2.0. You've secured the southern border. Now you got this issue in the Arctic, because that's going to be this, like the great game was in Afghanistan in the 19th century. It's a great power struggle up there as China's up there. Russia's spending all their time and money up there. The Arctic is going to be and this is one of the reasons Canada has to take seriously some sort of partnership. President Trump wants to state, but some sort of partnership with the United States, because now their greatest barrier, the Arctic North, is now their softest underbelly of exposure to a great power struggle, where the United States having Alaska and some sort of partnership with Greenland, which I think we will get. You add Canada and we can just block it up there. So it's a naval strategy. This is why when President Trump announced it, he's thought this thing through, I think, pretty well. The NATO countries, I said at the time, weeks ago, I said they better take the signal here, not the noise, because we're telling them the Russian army's your problem. We're not a continental power. We bailed you out in World War I. We came back and bailed you out again in World War II. We bailed you out again in the Cold War. We're done. The Ukraine thing's a disaster. We never should have been involved. We're done. The Russian army's your problem. And Pete Hegseth said today, I think in Munich at the security conference, he says, hey, Europe's got to understand European defense security is not a high priority for the United States. They're an ally. We don't want to be a protectorate or a vassal state. So we can get to it, but it's not a high priority. A high priority is securing the homeland. And President Trump is laying out a pretty serious plan. I will also tell your listeners, he's not kidding. He's not trolling people. When he talks about the Panama Canal, the Chinese Communist Party came down there and bought off the elites like they do. It's predatory capitalism. They had all the things in Chinese. The people were getting screwed. The people down there want us back. President Trump's going to take back the Panama Canal. That no doubt. And the Chinese Navy is not going to be sailing through there. The Greenland situation, he's absolutely serious in this. He talked about this in the first term. In fact, I think he had Ron Lauder, the executive, try to work a deal the first time with the Danes. So he's very serious about it. He's talked about this ever since I've known him. He's been obsessed with Greenland, and particularly naval warfare, and using a naval strategy to protect the United States of America, which is kind of, we were a naval power in World War II. Canada, he's very serious about that. If you look at geoeconomically and the tariffs we announced yesterday on the 25% tariffs on steel and aluminum, that's just part one. He looks at the United States as a premium market that the little guy is kind of supported and built over time. And he looks at it like you would look at buying a box at a sporting event or a front row ticket in a concert. It's a premium market. You got to pay a premium price. He doesn't look at tariffs like a 25% tariff on a Mexican avocado. That's an old way of thinking. Number one, he thinks it's a premium market. You should pay for that privilege to get in here. And the only way you don't pay is you put your manufacturing right here and you hire American citizens for those jobs.
Victor, your mic is muted.
All right, thank you. So there's a lot to unpack there, but he's literally giving you the game plan. And I ever since he came into office, I've been trying to define, what this new iteration of Maga is, this new Maga 2.0, or second version of it. And it's, I've been writing down a bunch of notes, and part of it is, I believe it's a white nationalist / white supremacist movement. It's a pseudo-nativist movement. And so when he's talking about workers, he's talking about white workers, right? And the same thing with the MAGA communists. That's what they're talking about, right? That's who they're really, that's their target audience. That's who they're trying to recruit. And then when Karina, you hit it on the head before. This is a strategic retreat, right? So they realize we're stretched out too thin. We've been getting our ass kicked all over the world. Anytime we get into any proxy war, military, or we get involved in stuff, we just get our ass kicked. Going all the way back to the Vietnam War. We just keep getting our ass kicked over and over. So it's like these MAGA folks, like, they have it's a whole paradigm shift. And it's about, like, let's retreat. And all these folks, the MAGA communist folks, they're touting this stuff. They're like, these are great things. This is at our people's expense, because what they're talking about is now basically trying to create a new hegemony, or not a new, because they've always been the hegemony, but making sure that they have complete dominance over the region, over the whole hemisphere. Right. And that's like their focus. So who's going to be targeted here? It's our people. We have a couple people. Oh, we have Nick coming in. Nick, you're coming in here twice. Nick, I think you have an issue on your end. We have you here twice.
Oh,
are you good?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So, yeah, I can hear you. So it's like it's Bannon said a lot there. He talked about mass deportation there. Monroe Doctrine 2.0. He said Trump is serious about taking over the Panama Canal. He's serious about the Canada thing. Like, these folks have this very strange warp, but like they have a plan. So I'll stop there. But who's saying this? But us at this point. Like, people have to be very clear about these things. So I'll stop there with my rant, and someone can chime in.
Well, like you said, Victor, I think this is the perfect example of, like, the retreat. They're trying to, number one, soft backpedal on the idea that, the U.S. can no longer be like the caretaker of the entire globe, as if it was, some, like, by grace that, the U.S. was, imposing economic terrorism all over the world. But then, how many times have we seen American politicians say that, refer to the global South countries in this hemisphere as America's backyard? And so it's kind of a reflection of this, I think it's also a paranoia to the point of schizophrenia. The American mentality that, if we know we're no longer a global hegemon, so we're going to try and take control of whatever we can. And so, I think Trump's paranoia was revealed in one of the press conferences he gave from the Oval Office a while back, wherein he said, he was mentioning BRICS, and it was rather humorous because he confused Spain with a BRICS country. But anyway, he told on himself because he does realize the alliances that are being made in the global south, the de-dollarization, the alternative structures of economic and political power. That is the real threat. So that is what they're trying to hold on to right now in the last-ditch effort, as the retreat to a regional power. They think they're going to take the whole hemisphere with them. I don't think that's going to be very smooth for the United States. What do you think, Nick?
Yeah, so sorry I'm joining late. Just want to say hi to everyone. I'm glad we're able to be doing this again. And I was able to catch some of Bannon's speech before we got started, and I thought it was interesting. I think I do agree with you and everything you said, Karina. And it reminds me a lot of what we heard Marco Rubio, and I've been seeing reports about what Marco Rubio's been saying, where he's been, and I'm not sure if you guys talked about this earlier, but he acknowledges the multipolar world that we're moving into. And kind of like what you've been saying, it seems that the current administration's strategy is to accept the fact that the United States is not in the position that it once was, and to try to put themselves in a position of control and power in managing their demise and managing this transition to a multipolar world. And they don't want that to be completely out of their hands, out of their control. And that's what we're seeing. And I think there's a lot of things that are pointing to that. I think one of the biggest things is the complete collapse of the international law and things like international human rights. That is being completely done away with not just with Trump, but with Biden, with their support of the Israeli genocide. This complete, and think about the U.S. Since the end of the Cold War, has positioned itself as the beacon of human rights, democracy, and freedom. And now all of that, within just a year, it's been a complete 180 where, that doesn't matter. We just need to be in power. And if we need to ally ourselves with whoever is going to help us achieve that goal, then we're going to do that. And I think they're embracing that ideology.
This is what I say about Trump. I mean, some people think I'm crazy, but I say that Trump is honest, at least, because he says what he thinks. He does not try to package it in other languages. He does not say that it's a humanitarian intervention that he is going to do, or that he is going to do something for human rights, etc. Whenever he is attacking a country, attacking a people, he is being honest that he wants something. He wants their wealth. He wants, especially their natural resources, or he wants Panama Canal because he believes that, he did not say it, but I mean, he has also that, because Chinese have a lot of influence in Panama, and it cannot be allowed because it is the U.S. backyard. China cannot be allowed to have any influence, that is economic influence, because China does not have any military base, any naval base, anything in South America. But still, he is saying, I think it's also sort of manufacturing consent in the US population of attacking China someday, if US is so crazy about it. But yeah, it's sort of manufacturing consent that China is in our land. So it's the US backyard, even if it is not. The people just do not want to be, they are not of the United States, but still, it's the US backyard, it's the US hemisphere, the Western hemisphere belongs to the US, so China is in our backyard. That's why we have to curtail Chinese influence in our land. And it's very interesting that I was noting down what Steve Bannon was saying in that interview that Jimmy Dore did with him, and he was he mentioned very interestingly Bolsonaro. He said you get Bolsonaro and Milei and you secure the hemisphere. It's very interesting because Bolsonaro is not the president of any country at the moment. So what is it talking about? Or is that a sort of admission, a slip of tongue, a Freudian slip, that they would want to do a coup in Brazil and put Bolsonaro in charge there in order to have that country back under US control, or as much control as the US would like, because Lula is sort of ambivalent at the moment, but still he's not a US puppet. So Bolsonaro,
Which by the way, Saheli, I'm sorry to interrupt. The United States has done that before already with that political party in Brazil. It's not like it hasn't been done already.
Yes, exactly. Like when Trump was there before, I mean, during Trump 1.0, the former Trump administration, it was Bolsonaro in Brazil, and he wreaked a lot of havoc, not just in Brazil, but in all countries around the world. Like he was one of the biggest faces of the Lima group that tried to do regime change in Venezuela. So it's like they know each other, and they did the coup, like you said, by jailing Lula, by getting his party out of, I mean, just through a parliamentary coup. And it was not Trump, it was Obama who did that. So first Obama, then Trump. I mean, it's not like they are very different. They do the same things. Their faces may be different, their parties may be different, but the people are not, the strategies do not change. So Bolsonaro, and then he said Milei. Well, Argentina, of course, it has a lot of weight in the world, or in Latin America at least, but it is not, with Milei, actually what the US is doing is it is securing the energy resources of Argentina, and it is also trying to get China and Russia out of the energy market in Argentina. The nuclear energy, or you talk about the gas fields, etc. All that US wants for itself. So yeah, Milei may look like a clown. Milei may be a clown, but he is the president after all of that country, and he is securing the energy resources, because US always has its eye on the energy resources. Now it wants lithium, it wants other rare earth minerals, etc. And he did not name Bukele. I mean, what's his name? Bannon did not name Bukele because El Salvador is a very small country, but it is in a very important strategic position in Central America. And I think Karina mentioned it before that Bukele promised Marco Rubio to incarcerate the migrant detainees who would be deported to their countries, but maybe they would not be deported to their countries. They'll be put in prison in El Salvador. And let's remember that El Salvador has been in a state of emergency since March 2022. So it's almost 3 years now. And it's a state of emergency, meaning military curfew and military state, basically. And Bukele also re-elected himself unconstitutionally. These things are not talked about in the US, but these are real. So they're supporting an unconstitutional president, a de facto president in a way, in El Salvador, while they want to depose an elected government in Venezuela and elsewhere. Now, in fact, just a few days ago, in White, in New York Times, had an article, an opinion piece, headlined very obviously, depose Maduro. And they want to get rid of the Venezuelan government, and they're trying to create a consensus for it. I mean, they already have been creating a consensus since the early 2000s, but now they're claiming that Iran and Russia have military bases in Venezuela. And what is true is that the US has military bases in Trinidad, probably in Jamaica, probably, because we do not know, possibly in Guyana, and they will be trying to use these Caribbean states as proxies against another Caribbean state, which is Venezuela. He also mentioned tariffs on Canada, on Canada and Mexico. Interestingly, the tariff on Canada is being talked about a lot more than the tariffs on Mexico. The thing is this, that it is a sort of pressure tactic on Mexico, not just about migration, but also about its sovereignty, because starting with AMLO, but now more with Sheinbaum, the current president, Mexico has been exerting its sovereignty a lot more and is trying to build alliances, economic alliances with other parts of the world. China has a lot of economic investments in Mexico, so the US is sort of imagining that that country, which is just south of the border, which was always a US vassal state, is now slipping away from its grip. It's imagining, it is not, because it cannot. I mean, the Mexico is just on the US border. It can be invaded like easily. Still, these tariffs are a sort of, the steps towards an invasion. It's a threat. Same with Canada. And I think he also mentioned Greenland and the Arctic, but I'll talk about it later. I have been talking too long, and I would stop now and let you people talk about it. Or
The talk of tariffs is another example of this kind of, it's always the downfall of every empire, I think. But for example, the hubris is so high in Donald Trump's, administration. Like, where is the logic in threatening your two biggest trading partners, in the hemisphere? This amount of hubris is just going to lead to further isolation. That's why he's so triggered by BRICS. That's why he was, because there are going to be real alternatives, real economic and political structures, and a great opportunity for South-South alliances now. And so also the hubris in trying to sanction all these global South countries in this hemisphere is going to come back to bite the U.S. because, it's like, well, we're not looking for U.S. dollars anymore to invest. There will be other, currencies that will be sought out more reliable for investment. And so it's like in the Americas, the United States hubris, it's like just further and further isolating itself. And I don't think, I know I'm hopeful that the Monroe Doctrine 2.0, to Latin America isn't successful. I think there's a tremendous opportunity now, just as, we talked about some of the Maga, resurgence of, white supremacist, outward behavior. This is all like a manifestation of the deep insecurity that the U.S. has always had, because it knows it's an illegitimate nation. It has been an illegitimate, global power. It usurped the place of the, British Empire. Well, now there's the difference between the, decline of the British Empire and the U.S. Empire is there's no one to take the U.S.'s place in terms of at least a state. And so it's like, if we want to talk about, mechanisms of soft imperialism, the U.S. aid, I think, is another example of the United States withdrawing because it can't afford it anymore. The U.S. is retreating from imperial maintenance, so it's less carrot and just the stick that we're going to see, so.
Definitely. I don't think this could be overstated. I keep thinking about what we're seeing, and it hasn't even been 30 days. And I just, now I'm going to make an appeal to our folks again. Please like, please share, please subscribe, but really talk to other folks in the community that look like you, right? And tell them what's happening. Explain to them what's happening. If you don't understand what's happening, then try to tune in, tap in, reach out to us, because this is a real, not just, and by the way, so some are going to interpret, what I'm about to say is like, then the other political party wasn't a threat. MAGA is an existential threat to our people, to Latin Americans, to Chicanos, to Latinos. And that's not to say that the Democrats weren't. It's just I view this MAGA as explicit. Like they just want to accelerate things. Like they're just willing to just, as Saheli said, they're just telling you the truth. If you go back and listen to Malcolm X, here's the difference. The Democrats pretend that they're your friend, right? They're the liberal. They're the sly fox. They want to pretend they're your friend. Over there, if you watch the DNC, it's like the inclusion party. Like, you too can be a capitalist. You too can be an imperialist. You too can partake in being, and being this bloodthirsty, demon and we can take over the world together, right? And then you look at the RNC, and it's just a bunch of pasty old white folks, right? Like, so, but with the MAGA folks, at least they're telling you straight up. Like, if you're paying attention, like they're telling you straight up, like, yeah, we don't give a fuck about you and your people, like at all. Like, this is a nativist movement. We're gonna take care of the white workers. Monroe Doctrine. We're gonna go after Latin America by whether it's by force or through tariffs or through economic terrorism, whatever. And it's like they're telling you straight up. And then what's interesting is that a lot of our people, and I know you folks in your circles, I'm pretty sure you've seen it. I know I've talked about it, off air with you folks. Where I have folks who I grew up with who are buying into this stuff. And my question to them is, how much is your soul worth? Because they're protecting their material interests. They've now bought into the American dream. They don't even identify anymore with their own people. They're willing to sell themselves out and sell their people out to preserve their status here in this Ponzi scheme, right? In this fucking Ponzi scheme that is this American empire. So I just caution folks. I just tell, please, like, we need to start having these discussions. I see these images that are constantly being projected about our people, and it's driving me personally crazy because, again, I think about the little kids, I think about the elderly, I think about the people in our community, and it's like we're all, according to white America, we're all criminals, we're all thugs, we're all rapists, we're all murderers. We're either lazy or we work too much because we're stealing your job. So that one's confusing to me because, like, which one is it? So, and it's they're playing the stuff over, and not to say that it was never like this. I don't know if I've ever felt it like this. And I'm going to work. I'm hearing white workers talk about it right in front of my face, like, and they're celebrating. They're like literally celebrating. You go to the Wawa, you go to the 7-Eleven, you go to the grocery store, and they're talking about this openly, celebrating it. Trump is doing it. He's getting rid of all of them, us, right? And it's like I say to myself, like, where are our people? Where are we at? And I get it. I understand part of our shortcomings. We've talked about this off air about, what is a Latino? What is a Latin American? We've been around for about 500 years. So there's a lot of, to use a street term, there's a lot of knowledge of self that we need to do. There's a lot of educating there's a lot that we need to do in terms of educating our people on who we are. And I will take a page out of the Malcolm X playbook and say, we need to teach pride. We need to teach people that, brown is beautiful. Our people are beautiful. Latinos are beautiful. Latin Americans are beautiful. We're good people. We're great people. We're hardworking people, industrious people. We have people that, do wonderful things in different capacities. And we're not what they're trying to say that we are. We're not that. And it's not only that. We need to organize, and we need to talk to one another, and we need to build community. And we need to, Sister Karina, you talked about how the global South and Latin America, they need to build relationships. But we need to build relationships. Again, Malcolm X talked about this too. No one's talking about a physical migration back to Latin America, at least not yet, but at least a spiritual migration, right? Like, we need to figure out, who are we, right? Like, if you don't know, if you're Dominican, I'm Dominican, right? So like, I'm specifically talking about to my Dominican people. For Dominican Day Parade, when we go out there and we celebrate and we dance and we got the flag, and what does that mean? Do you know your own history? Do you know that we were colonized? Do you know that we were invaded twice by the United States in the 20th century? Do you know that we had our own revolution before the United States stepped in? Like, do you know about these things? And again, no one has a monopoly on information, but it's like, we have to start teaching our people. We have to start learning to love one another, protecting our people, protecting one another. And they're coming after us. And if this is not this is not some type of hyperbolic statement, like, this is real. Like, this is real. They're telling you that they're going after us. And so I'll stop my little diatribe there, but I just think these are dangerous times, and we really need to start thinking about this and these topics.
Yeah, I think I wanted to say, yeah, I agree with you, Big. And I think everything you said was true. Especially, I think what's scary for me is, I think Gustavo Petro had a good quote. I think it was a few months back, and he said that Hitler is knocking on the door of U.S. Families and U.S. households, and they're welcoming him in. And really, what he's saying is the the class, or what you want to call middle class, this professional class, this working class, the wealthy in this country have overwhelmingly welcomed this sort of MAGA fascist ideology and ways of thinking, the scapegoating. And what's scary to me is not so much the MAGA stuff, but it's that liberals and even the people who have, you know, who fought for sanctuary cities, who fought to protect immigrants the first time around, these folks have like abandoned, they've given up on these struggles, and they've shown that they're willing to turn their backs and sacrifice groups that aren't willing to help them in their interest. So what you find, what I've seen at least, is this sort of isolating moment where a lot of, whether they be conservative or liberal, all of the I would say a large portion of the U.S. Population is turning its back and sort of just turning a blind eye towards a lot of these abuses. And the abuses that they do, and when they do talk about these abuses, they're not really doing anything. They're not actively doing anything about them. One thing I would say is that we have been seeing some pretty big movements. At least I saw online in Southern California and LA. There's been some pretty big movements among student movements, to protect migrants, and it's there's been some organizing. But again, when you are losing liberals, when you're losing a large portion of people who formerly had at least a little bit of support, it's concerning, because this whole country, it seems to have welcomed fascism. It's like that, that other famous quote where you scratch a liberal and you underneath you find a fascist. It seems that that's really where we're going.
Well, I think that the clip that Victor chose with Bannon and Jimmy Dore was another material example of what we've consistently seen. We saw it, for example, during COVID with the trucker strikes, and Jimmy Dore, who had basically positioned himself as kind of like the pundit for the really progressive left. They were pushing for a new working class party in the US at one point. And so we can see that when, these contradictions come closer and closer to the forefront, how on the drop of a hat, the, quote unquote, progressive left, white progressive left, will ally with the extreme radical, white. I mean, these white nationalism is stronger than any religious indoctrination, anything I've ever seen, and so I think that's one of the reasons why, as Victor said, it's important that we talk to each other so that we know who we are, because if we look at one of the things that we've talked about is what happened to the revolutionary fervor of the 60s and 70s. Well, one of the ways that U.S. empire kind of tried to beat, for example, I will speak about Chicano nationalism out of us is by creating an umbrella term like, Hispanic. And so Hispanic was kind of, when President Nixon introduced that to the U.S. Census in 1970, you can better believe it was a very direct attack on Chicano and Boricua, nationalism that was, there was very revolutionary fervor going on at the time. What happened? Well, they beat our people into submission psychologically. They killed us. They imprisoned people. Our people became political prisoners, were dehumanized. And one of the ways that I think I remember, this is not a novel idea, but this is taken directly from what the Black Panthers said. Their first political education class, the first thing they would address with all their new recruits is that you are not an American. You are not an American. You are a victim of what America has done. And so, but this incessant propaganda that we are, it's kind of an intellectual sadism from morning to night. There's this propaganda. We were indoctrinated from the time, I don't know if you know about this, Saheli, but in U.S. public schools, it was very customary to start the day by saying the Pledge of Allegiance. And this indoctrination is very, very real. And it's like, when these notions of who real Americans are, when this political reality is challenging, and that's why they tried to squash Chicano nationalism so much. And, for example, it was illegal to do native spiritual or religious practices until the 1970s, is because they are so terrified. They want to disrupt any semblance of a legitimate political reality here on this land, because they know that, collective sovereignty and sovereignty is always going to be land-based. And so if we're making a claim as a legitimate political entity on this land, that is very threatening to them, And so, I mean, if you think about American propaganda, like having U.S. flags everywhere, to me, that's a deep sign of insecurity, like that is a really deep sign of insecurity, like having to blast, make sports games and all these, big spectacles, like basically U.S. military parades, like, it's incessant promotion of this idea that the United States has created for itself, like a comic book hero, you know what I mean? And so when you attack that facade, that whole facade is basically crumbling now. And so that's why it's kind of, like I said, a paranoia to the point of schizophrenia. It's like this shooting as you retreat, like see what sticks. Well, we're going to impose Monroe Doctrine 2.0 and make us a, hegemonic power instead of just a regional power, which I think the U.S. knows is ultimately going to be its fate. But, it's a last ditch effort for every grasp of power that it can.
I think they're also being honest in this case, that they are becoming a regional power instead of a global one, because this was happening for quite some time. But the former administration, I mean the Democrats, sort of refused to see it, or maybe they saw it. I'm not saying that they did not see it, but they did not want their supporters to see it, so they did not want to talk about it. They did not even mention it. They did not ever mention the word multipolar, etc. Whereas the current administration has already accepted it, because they know that this is what is happening. So when I say that they're honest, I mean that they say it. They say what they want. They say what they see, and if they are white nationalists, they say it out proudly, because that is their pride. In fact, the Democrats are the same. I was just, while you were talking, Victor was putting out all these news articles from mainstream media, from History Channel, from mainstream channels, all about U.S. military coups in Latin America, in various countries of Latin America. And also there was the Iran-Contra thing. So it was also, at the time, Iran was also a vassal state, sort of, with the Shah. So what was happening is that during all those periods, it's not like it was only the Republicans who were in power during all those 50 years of coup. So it was Republican, Democrats, all sorts of administrations, the two sides, or whatever they're called in the US. And we can see from all these coups that it is not that. It's all the same. They're not just foreign policy. I'm sure their domestic policy is also the same. Their foreign policy, openly, Sam. And it is it is CIA, it's NSA, it's all these organizations, the security state, that declassify their own archives 50, 60 years later, openly stating that they have done this in the past. Why should we believe that they're not doing it now? And 50, 60 years later, they will be declassifying their documents again like this, that they were doing dirty war currently in Mexico. They're doing a dirty war elsewhere. They're doing a hybrid war against Venezuela. They're doing a multi-pronged war against all over Latin America. They have a new operation, like Operation Condor 2.0 is currently going on. They will exactly like 50, 60 years later, in what would be like 2070, 2080, they will be admitting this. They will be declassifying their files, and they will be exactly admitting that we poured this billions of dollars into these countries to destabilize this country, to induce forced migration. We destabilized this country and changed its government. We did this in Bolivia. We wanted the lithium. They will say this openly. And at that time also, if they still exist, they will continue to do the same. And in the next next century they will be declassifying their files again. So it's like it's going on and on and on, and we should not remain blind anymore.
I like that comment you made, Saheli, when you said it's kind of like by releasing the like the CIA files, it's kind of a psyop on the audience because they want you to think, oh yeah, we're acknowledging that we did this in the past. Well, you're absolutely right. Of course it's going on still. It's like, we can we've talked about USAID a lot recently as kind of being the soft arm of US imperialism. And I mean, a lot of you'd be shocked at how many Americans didn't realize that Lopez Obrador openly wrote a letter to Biden and said, hey, we know that you've been trying to fund the, my opponents and trying to coup me out of office since 2018. So that was a real thing. Like, I mean, the American public, that's the great role about why I love the opportunity to do, agitprop and stuff is because, we know revolution is a protracted struggle. And I think that one of our greatest responsibilities right now is an ideological battle, because we have to keep these ideas alive and keep consistently refining our analysis and correcting our analysis and making it as strong as possible, because we've really got, as Victor said, our fate and the fate of all our nation, our homelands and sister nations, it's, it just becomes, more and more of how can you say, it openly exposes the agenda of US imperialism. It's like the veneer of, all these democratic institutions is now crumbling. Like, we have the veneer of the Supreme Court, we have the veneer of voting presidential elections, we have the veneer of a Supreme Court, of an executive office. All of these, structures are kind of a veneer. Everything, there is no lever of control in the United States that is not under the control of corporations. Every single lever of control is subservient to corporations. And so, as John Baraka said, and Nick also mentioned, Gaza showed, or the Palestinian, the battle in Gaza showed the veneer of Western liberalism is completely, falling now. The structure is crumbling. So what you see is the very ugly reality of what's always been, underneath, and the Democrat and Republican Party is kind of like, well, do you prefer a more sophisticated version of fascism or a more crude version of fascism? Would you like to go to a white supremacist rally or a KKK rally? You know what I mean? It's just, but as Saheli said, this idea of, that they can't help but tell the truth now. It's like there's an uncomfortable truth and it's being addressed, but they're not going to retreat, without trying to mess as much as they can up, for the threats that they perceive. And the threats that they perceive, I will always say, is that Chicanos represent a legitimate political authority on this land. So do indigenous nations and native people. So that is part of, this delusional pseudo-nativism that is always part of settler colonialism, that, where the invader has to take over the identity of being the native. So you have ideologically genocided the actual native people in that sense.
All right, so we're at by the way, this is you're listening to ANTICONQUISTA. We're at ANTICONQUISTA.com. Please like, please share, please subscribe, get the word out there. We appreciate you folks supporting us. And as far as supporting us, we, so I always tell folks I'm real proud of the work that we do at ANTICONQUISTA. We're consistent. Everyone does this, on their own time. This is truly a labor of love. I've been here now several years, and we could all attest. Saheli, I know you're not part of ANTICONQUISTA, but my other two comrades over here can attest that no one puts their hand in the cookie jar. The majority of the money that we receive from our followers is donated, and I say most of it because, of course, there's always a little bit of overhead, and so sometimes you do have to pay some bills. But for the most part, the overwhelming majority of the money, it just gets donated, right? And so I want to switch gears a little bit. There was a comment here I highlighted before. When you compromise with reactionaries like groups as ACP does, for example, you aren't turning conservatives into communists. You're just making communism reactionary. And so we've been a little bit in the social media stratosphere over the last week or so as we took a critical position against ACP. Karina, did you want to read the public statement that we put out recently?
Yes, let me pull it up here.
Just before you read the public statement, I would say that I do know that ANTICONQUISTA helps their own people around the world, because I know that I'm from Orinoco Tribune and we receive donations from ANTICONQUISTA, so thanks a lot for that, and not just for the money but also for the support and for having me. We know that you do a lot of good work.
Yeah, and let me explain that. So Orinoco Tribune is an independent media outlet. Everyone should support them as well if you could. They do wonderful work, and they deserve. See, that's the type of organization that deserves support from the community. Like, if you're gonna put your money somewhere, support Orinoco Tribune, because they put out tremendous work. They're independent. They're not telling you that, oh, I'm some sort of political activist and donate to me and I'm gonna put that money in my pocket. They're actual journalists. So, like, they're actually doing investigative journalism. They're actually putting out real in-depth analysis. And they also do this with a very low budget, and it's a labor of love over there as well. And they deserve that type of support, and that's why we supported them. So for sure, Saheli, we're very proud of the fact that we were able to provide you with again what we would consider revolutionary mutual aid.
And we also have a red card campaign going on right now. Do you want to mention that, Victor? Or
yeah, absolutely. So how many cards did we order?
2,500.
2,500. Okay. So again, it's what we can do at the moment. So there we have these Know Your Rights cards for our undocumented community. And so if you need these cards, reach out to us. We will send them out to you. Let us know how many you need, and we will send them out to you. As I mentioned before, our communities are they're under siege, they're under attack. And I've had plenty of conversations with folks about this issue. And what's interesting is they're not going to certain, as far as we're Nick, you and I are on the ground. Karina, you're on the ground. Like we get text messages all the time. And as soon as those deportations started happening, Nick and I are from Jersey. Karina, you're from West Coast. We were hearing, oh, they're in my community, they're in this community, but I don't hear they're in any Western European communities. I haven't heard that. And we know that we have undocumented. And I'm not saying that and by the way, I'm not saying that I want them to go after them. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying, it's interesting, right, that they go specifically into our communities and not other communities. So that being said, we do have these Know Your Rights cards for folks that need them. And if you need them, just please reach out to us and we'll get some out to you.
Thanks. And I'll briefly say, so the way to request them is at info@anticonquista.com. And we've had such an overwhelming response, actually, that we're probably going to continue ordering more cards as we can as a material way to support our community. So you want me to go ahead and read the statement now? Okay. So this is our statement, Anticonquista statement on the so-called American Communist Party, ACP. Anticonquista, as a platform dedicated to advancing Latin America's struggle against colonial capitalist oppression, publicly and officially denounces the American Communist Party, ACP. The profound theoretical contradictions of this organization, attempting to reconcile Marxism with imperialist U.S. nationalism, are not the result of intellectual shortcomings, but something far worse. The ACP serves as a vehicle for a handful of opportunistic internet personalities, self-styled as an executive board, who seek to elevate their individual profiles, social status, and financial gain rather than advance revolutionary struggle. There is little value in seriously engaging with the ideological incoherence of their program, except to note that their evident racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, and anti-immigrant prejudices make it clear they are not an organization for the Latin American diaspora or any oppressed peoples. Their political line ultimately subordinates anti-colonial resistance to the interests of the imperial core, refusing to acknowledge the United States as a settler colonial state built on genocide, enslavement, and super-exploitation. However, it is evident that ACP leadership does not even hold these positions out of deep ideological conviction. And if they did, they would be our political enemies in a different sense. Instead, their opportunism drives them to appeal to a mass white base, viewing this demographic as key to expanding their organization and, by extension, their personal benefits. Moreover, the ACP's leadership demonstrates a pattern of insular, authoritarian, and unaccountable behavior that mirrors the very bourgeois institutions it claims to oppose. It actively suppresses criticism, sidelines marginalized voices, and maintains a structure that prioritizes careerist self-promotion over genuine class struggle and revolutionary organizing. A true revolutionary communist organization in the imperial core must place anti-colonial struggle and the global South solidarity at the center of its praxis, not as an afterthought, but as its foundation. The ACP has proven itself incapable of this, accommodating white supremacist tendencies rather than confronting them, because its true objectives do not lie in revolutionary transformation. We stand unequivocally with the oppressed, with the struggles of the global South, with those who remain under foreign occupation in the imperial core, and with all those who refuse to compromise in the fight against colonialism, capitalism, and imperialism. Instead of paying dues to ACP, we invite people to support the revolutionary front line in their homelands.
Thank you. And what's interesting about that, so that one line right there, I thought about this the other day. So I think I forget what our actual numbers are in terms of our following, in terms of Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Folks can look that up. But here's the point, and you folks, this is an easy fact check. Any one of us individually, if you look at our individual profiles, like ANTICONQUISTA has way more followers than any of us individually. If you look at the ACP, the opposite holds true. And you can make the argument, what's a fledgling organization, Vic? Give us some time. No, listen, Jackson Hinkle, who I call Twinkle Toes, has 2.5 million followers. Haas has over 100,000 followers. And the ACP has a little over 51,000 followers. I don't believe any of them have, at least, let me back that up. Let me be, okay. The main stars of those groups, Haas, Twinkle Toes, Jackson Hinkle, Carlos Garrido, I don't know what he does. I know he sells books. And Eddie, I guess, is the other star of that group. I don't know if anyone actually has any. I don't know if one of those folks actually has a job, right? And by the way, there's nothing wrong with being unemployed, right? I mean, that doesn't make you less of a human being. I'm not casting any judgment, but here's the thing, these guys ask for money, and let's put it this way: Haas and Twinkle Toes, I'll challenge them. We could redact our socials. We could put up our income tax returns. I want to know where you guys make your money from, because from a little birdie told me that you guys make your money off of this stuff. In other words, you go and you tell people that you're this revolutionary activist, you're this revolutionary leader, and you're asking people for money on your streams, and that's how you sustain yourself. Now, I'm sorry, but that ain't revolutionary. Like, it's not. I'm a worker. I'm in a union. I deal with natural gas. I'm on the front lines every single day. Like, I can actually get killed for my job because I'm dealing with natural gas. I'm creating surplus capital for the capitalists. I'm a productive member of this society. Like, these folks are out here asking for money and claiming to be these revolutionary leaders with these backwards tendencies, communist. It's a joke. And so and by the way, I promise I'll let you folks speak. But this is the one that really, really irked me. I mean, there's a couple things that really irked me, but the one that really, like, over the top for me was this right here. And this is what I'm talking about. Like, we need to start protecting our people.
Yeah.
Now, like this one right here, this is an ad for Claudia de la Cruz and Karina, I believe her last name is Garcia, right? Yeah, Garcia. they were running on a ticket for president and for president of the United States and vice president of the United States under the PSL. Now, we have our criticisms of PSL. I'm not going to talk about that right now. That's immaterial to the conversation. But these are two sisters. I actually voted for them. Again, that's my prerogative. That's not an ACP line. That's not a, excuse me. It's not an Anticonquista line. I voted for them, right? And we have here these two sisters in this ad, and here you have Jackson Hinkle all the way at the bottom responding to this tweet. America would be better off if you two, if both. What did he say right there? If
they were both deported.
If you were both deported.
Yeah.
Let me repeat that again. America would be better off if you were both deported. Like, how would, like, again, to my Latino brothers out there, like, how do we tolerate this? How do we accept this? You know, like, this is what I'm talking about when I say we have to start protecting our people, protecting our own, protecting our sisters, the elderly, the children. Like, it starts with shit like this. And for anyone who's over there in ACP, if you're Latino, I ask the question to you. How much is your soul worth? Is this is the type of shit that you're down with? You're cool with this? And what is going to be your excuse? Oh, well, it's the PSL. No, man. You're not allowed, Jackson Hinkle, you're not allowed to come into our community and start disrespecting our sisters like that. I don't care if they're middle-class liberals. I don't care if they're working-class people. I don't care if it's my mom who has no political ideology and speaks no English. You're not allowed to come into our communities and start disrespecting our sisters like this. You know? So if we have other examples, we have much more. If you folks want to, want me to put it up, I can. But they're consistent with this type of behavior. They're consistent with this type of behavior, and it's disgusting. Anyone who supports this, like, where is your mind and heart at? It doesn't make any logical sense. I'll stop there because I can go on for a long time with this.
Well, I mean, like we've said before, it's an appeal to as broad of a mass-wide base as they can, appeal to. They're appealing to the deep insecurities of white Americans. They're giving validity to the insecurity of the settler. And it's also, I think, as you mentioned, this Victor, this promotion of these superstars of the ACP. It's a perfect example of American hyper-individualism. It's putting, the superstar above, above the collective. It's like a little Hollywood spectacle is what it, by propping up these. I think we've got more screenshots, but I think one of the Hinkles has been called Star or something like that. It's just it's like I hate to say it, sounds like like I said, I won't say what I was going to say, but it was just a perfect example of American hyper-individualism, I will say.
Well, okay, so I had initially decided not to say anything about this, but I will. And it is that, what I find in terrible taste on the part of the so-called American Communist Party is that they try to use Global South movements as shills, as examples, as that they're following. So they would claim that they are following, they claim that they're following into the footsteps of the Cuban Revolution when they're doing something. And you would wonder, when was the Cuban Revolution white supremacist? When was the Cuban Revolution not inclusive of all the races that are there in Cuba? This is something they went to Jackson Hinkle and I think Haas, Carlos, etc. Carlos Garrido. I mean, they went to Venezuela many times, and what they would do is, like, they would pretend that they support the Bolivarian Revolution. Perhaps they do. I'm not saying that they don't. Perhaps they do. But when they're in their streams, in their party lines, whatever they might be, in their writings, Carlos writes, right? So in their writings, they would go and say things like, "We are following what the Bolivarian Revolution did, or we will do these sort of things that they have done." And you will wonder, when was the Bolivarian Revolution not inclusive? When was it talking about deporting Africans, Afro-Venezuelans? When has it talked about deporting anyone, anywhere, not even white people? I mean, there was a huge migration of Europeans during the early 20th century into Venezuela. There was a huge migration of Asian Arab origin people Nobody is talking about deporting these people, right? So why are they talking about just why does the ACP talk about sending back the migrants from Latin America into the US? Why are they talking about this sort of thing and claiming at the same time that they are following Global South movements, that they support the Global South, that they support Yemen, that they support China, etc. But they then, in their actions, they do the exact opposite. Question is, what is this? So I mean, they do not have consistency. They are, I mean, they do not have any, I think they do not really have any ideological position that could be called communist, that could even be called left, because they are not. They just use us as shields, as weapons, as whatever you wish to call, and to just pander to to I would say that to depoliticized people, to people who have become insensitive to social, what have been going on socially, and they just go on blaming people who are not responsible for what has happened in the society, in the economy. Like I would say, this one about deporting, Claudia de la Cruz and Karina Garcia, which is even, it's even if we play by their rule books, where are you going to deport Karina Garcia? She is a Chicana. She belongs to the US much more than Jackson does. Like, she is, I mean, she is in the south of the US, and just a few minutes ago, Victor was putting up this mm, uh, a clip or maybe an article about how Mexico lost 55% of its land. I mean, it's 55% of its land was stolen by the US. Its anniversary was just a few days ago. So Karina lives in a place like that. So why not return that whole south of the US to Mexico? And these people will then go back to their land. I mean, they're in their land. They will just go back to their country. Like, why don't you do that? Instead, you were claiming this sort of things, like deport them to where? Where are you going to deport Karina Garcia is my question. To Jackson and whoever else wants to deport her.
Well,
Yeah, I
historically,
think
the U.S. has always deported. I mean, we look back at, we recently did a series on Operation Wetback and that kind of stuff. The U.S. has historically, deported people who represent the legitimate political authority, because it's, they can't coalesce this fiction that they've built up so much. And I think that it's also kind of it's another example of how the indoctrination is so strong. Like, it has to keep with each generation that goes on, it has to keep re-legitimizing itself. It's like every generation. I mean, I'm so tired of hearing people say that. I don't know about you guys, but that the old racists are dying out. No, they're not. They just reproduce. It's like, it's the whole idea that you can rebuild the United States in some communist way, because that's basically built on the idea that there is something fundamentally good and pure and moral about settler colonialism. Because, as we said many times, you cannot build anything communist on a foundation of chattel slavery, ongoing indigenous genocide, and imperialism. So those two, you can't build on that. And I don't think that they've got any, and ACP's and kind of parallel to that is, I mean, they like deify the founding fathers. It's like, I mean, it's wild. I mean, I don't know how you're revolutionary and in any way where people were we know that. And for example, all the the Second Amendment, for example, was we know that was intended to protect the white man. And so it's like all these ugly truths of the United States, like they're never going to go away. It's only going to get worse until it implodes. And I think that I remember an interview that Huey P. Newton gave from Alameda County Jail one time, where the journalist asked him, "So what do you think then is the solution to racial tension in the United States," or something to that effect? And Huey P. Newton said, "Well, I don't think that the white Americans are mentally well enough to address these problems without a major catastrophe." And so exactly the nature of the catastrophe, I don't know what that's going to look like, but I'm certainly, expecting increased destabilization of American society, I think, to something that we've definitely never seen in our lifetimes. But that destabilization also creates, air pockets of power where, there will be also unprecedented opportunities, I think. So I look forward to that, and I'm eternally optimistic.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. It's always important to be optimistic, especially at times when I think things are looking more difficult. I did want to go back to one of the things Saheli said, that I find most disingenuous or sort of disgusting about this organization, and not just this organization, but there's a lot of people I've seen from the West, from the U.S., and not even from Western Europe, particularly. Journalists, academics, activists, individuals who use, as Sahili put it, almost like these movements and the Global South movement as a shield to defend their own reactionary ideologies. And it's interesting because they'll go to the Global South, they'll say they support Cuba, they'll support Venezuela, and then they'll come back here. And, I remember one of the things that the ACP and its leaders originally had is they supported a lot of the leaders who were attacking Venezuela. They still supported Trump. And then they went and turned around, and then they went to Venezuela and then pretended to support the Venezuela. To me, that's disingenuous, and it's almost evil. Like, in my opinion, it's like you're traitors. You're treasonous. You're committing treachery against the revolution, or like the movement that you're claiming to stand for, the revolutionary movement. And I think that's really where I find them to be most disturbing and sort of disgusting to me, is that they're even though I find that to be disturbing and disgusting, they are, I think, a great example of the American mindset, the U.S. mindset in particular, which is that of just opportunism, pure rank opportunism. And Jimmy Dore, I know you guys have had Jimmy Dore. I used to watch Jimmy Dore when he was, I think, before COVID, when he was actually he was progressive at one point, but pure rank opportunism, money. There was a good quote I saw recently. Someone posted on social media from Malcolm X, and he talks about, I don't know the quote exactly, but to paraphrase it, he just says something similar to, you could talk about, you could rant about racism, sexism, all the different kind of isms, but when they drop that dollar on you, that dollarism is going to be, the most heavy, most significant, most influential thing in someone's life. And that's true for a lot of these folks. That's true. For me, what I've seen recently in the United States is that's true for a lot of these pundits. The money means most. I have to hop out too in a second. I can stay on for like another 2 minutes, but I'm gonna have to leave early. Sorry about that.
No, all good, brother. All good. Again, this is ANTICONQUISTA. Check us out at anticonquista.com. Please like, please share, please subscribe. You know what, Nick? You just so I thought about something. I know a few times this is, by the way, not to totally digress, but I just want to be respectful. So I know we've said the name Malcolm X several times. I did it tonight, and he's best known as Malcolm X, I guess. But I want to be respectful. We do know that he died as El Haj Malik El Shabazz. So I know sometimes folks get real offended by that, and I don't want to offend anyone. It's a lot easier a lot of times to refer to him as Malcolm X. His legacy, a lot of times, that's everyone knows him as that. And so again, we mean no disrespect by calling him Malcolm X. Anyways, so yeah, look, I don't know if there's much more to add there. I was actually we were expecting their followers, because they're rabid followers, to start bombing us tonight with comments, but they haven't. And so I actually want to thank them if they have been watching. If they haven't, good. But except for the Latinos that are in their, the Chicanos and Latinos that are in their organization, if you do get to watch this, you have to really reconsider what you're doing over there. And I ask you, what is your soul worth, and what are you really doing? We've talked about this before. You can go back to other episodes that we've put other programs we've put on the Anticonquista platform. This is just a rebrand of sorts. They used to be, no one calls themselves a patriotic socialist anymore.
Okay.
That term is like that's gone, right? And so now it's MAGA communists, and you sort of see they vacillate, right? They pick and choose when they want to call themselves that now. It's weird. And so there'll probably be another iteration, moving forward when they get tired of this MAGA communist label. I did want to mention one other thing that really bothered me. This happened, I think, a couple years ago. I don't know the sister like that. We had a mutual, and by the way, rest in peace to Natalia Ovan, a great Brazilian journalist. She was a collaborator of ours. She collaborated with us at Anticonquista when she passed away recently. And she was really good friends with. And so here's where I'm going to go with this. Aminta. I forget Aminta's last name. A lot of us know her, sort of know who she is. Caleb Maupin had disrespected her many years ago. And I went and attacked him as well. And I reached out to her privately. I don't, like I said, I don't know the sister Aminta, but she's always been very pleasant to quote unquote speak to through, just by messaging her and stuff like that. She's a cool sister. And then obviously when Natalia passed away, I had a couple exchanges with her, and we were, we should still do that, Saheli. We talked about doing, just even if it's just a few minutes, Aminta said she would definitely join us to do some sort of memorial piece for Natalia. But part of me, the jersey comes out of me every once in a while. Some, motherfuck Caleb Maupin. Because again, this is what I'm talking about. Like, we just cannot allow people like him and people like Jackson Hinkle to come into our communities and speak to our sisters any old which way. We just can't allow that. We can't, and so, just that one also bothered me because I was in the public space as well. And like, Aminta didn't deserve that. She, again, I don't really care what our sisters do. You're just not entitled. You're not entitled to do that. Like, just period, But anyways, so I think we'll end it there. That was a lot for tonight. There's a lot of stuff going on. We should probably get back together again next week, because I think like 4 years ago, or the first iteration of this Trump thing, it's going to be a roller coaster ride. There's going to be a lot of stuff happening, and we have to be vigilant. We have to pay attention. And as always, anyone else before we any parting shots, or are we good? No. So I appreciate my two sisters over here. Appreciate you, Nick. Appreciate the audience. Again, check us out, anticonquista.com, on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And please like, please share, please subscribe. Everyone have a great night.
Thank you. Buenas noches.
Buenas noches.